occurrence balls being stolen is actually central to the plot. And I know what you're thinking because I thought the same thing. In fact, I actually dropped DanDaDan myself after finding out that basic premise of the story. But by chance I got into it again, and now I'm making this video so you don't have to be a moron like me who basically dropped peak fiction. You see, the first hurdle when getting into DanDaDan is when you find out that basic premise for why our characters start working together. And I honestly don't think you can be prepared for it. I knew the mangaka Yukinobu Tatsu worked and took inspiration from Chainsaw Man, so I was prepared for crazy, which it certainly is. I mean, we already are in a story with both aliens and yokais, aka ghosts, but this was on another level. So promise me you won't be like me, but actually stay and at least hear me out on why DanDaDan is great. Now, God knows why this is the specific thing being taken from him, but every other chapter mentions one of Occurrence's sexual organs. My only assumption is that the mangaka wanted to use an excuse like that for why they were fighting together in order to maintain high stakes for the individual while having a lower stake for the world, and of course to keep the mood light-hearted. Maybe the author just liked dirty jokes and is going in the footsteps of his inspiration. Anyhow, don't be fooled by the silly premise because this show delivers action. It's a shonen after all, and it's incredibly entertaining. It doesn't pull its punches when stakes gets high, and the love triangle is kinda interesting in the downtime, even if some of it's pretty standard harem stuff, I guess. Speaking of, what even is DanDaDan? First of all, I would describe DanDaDan as a coming-of-age story. It's about accepting your origins and what you like. Its main aspect is about coming into touch with your feelings, and I'm not gonna lie, it deals with some of those elements better than I've seen in other shows. Minor spoiler warning, I guess, but this show has a bit of a cuck factor. And I don't mean that literally, it's technically a spoiler, but it's very obvious who's gonna end up together from the start. And just like with any manga/anime love story, it takes 300 plus chapters to get there. Anyways, what I mean is that our MCs have to deal with more mature feelings of love. How about our female protagonist Momo, for an example, who refuses to call Okurun his real name because it reminds her of her childhood crush, and well, because she has a hard time dealing with her own emotions towards Okurun. Speaking of, our other main protagonist Okurun, or Ken Takakura, brings up questions like how do you react when someone gets along well with someone you love, and how do you make sure it's a proper reaction, and how do you even tell that story from the perspective of a flawed character? Well, that's where I would give Yukinobu Tatsu the biggest praise. Characters feel realistic and mature enough to understand these things while human enough to make mistakes around them. With that said, some characters are a bit crazy, and I'm gonna be real. I really am struggling trying to explain what DanDaDan is, and maybe that's not strange considering how crazy it is. As I mentioned earlier, Yukinobu Tatsu was an assistant to Tatsuki Fujimoto, the author of Chainsaw Man, and you can clearly see the inspiration how things can go truly batshit insane from time to time. To illustrate this while avoiding to spoil anything big, there is a story about a girl who has a yokai on her back. It turns out that yokai is her old dead childhood friend and that she cursed her for not singing with her during an idol audition. How do you solve such a situation? Therapy? An exorcism? No, of course you hire a rock band that drags out the spirit while on a cart pulled by muscular men, all while being chased by countless monsters as she has to revisit parts of her old trauma. And that is well pretty standard for this show, which makes it feel refreshing and sticking out from its more traditional elements. Speaking of, it's a shonen after all, and well, it follows the same traditional pattern. Get powers, train, get stronger, fight the enemies, which in this case are aliens and yokais, power scaling goes up, rinse and repeat. This is probably the point where I also want to talk about the anime, because when it comes to shonen, a lot is dependent on animation, and I'm happy to see that DanDaDan didn't disappoint. Now, I have talked about the use of CGI in the past, so I won't go into details about it here. Briefly put though, it's here to stay and a bit of a necessary evil for animators to be able to focus on what's important. Not to mention, I honestly think apart from like one scene, it it actually looks okay, and I can forgive it when the rest looks this good. In fact, it's so good I want to make another video in the future about it. But for now, let's just say it's creative, funny, and it really works well with the action scenes, whether it's Ocaran being a crazy yokai biting someone's thingy off, or Mono fighting against aliens while flashing scenes to her trying to kick her ex. Yeah, it doesn't disappoint. Speaking of, if you follow this channel for a while now, you know that I can get really hooked into a world, and this is definitely one of those. And it all comes down to the yokais and aliens. These yokais come in a solid mix of more old school infamous urban legends like the slit mouth woman, and with that the way to beat these yokais vary from using different rituals and old school techniques to, well, beating the crap out of it. It's a shonen after all, and the other is aliens, which they can just beat up as well. Now, you would think a setting that mixes heavy sci-fi elements with a more traditional ghost hunting story would be messy, and I guess in a sense it is, but in a good way. You see, the lore behind it is kinda interesting and actually makes a lot of sense. So the aliens want to invade Earth, that's why they're there in the first place, and if you're anything like Ocaran, who is a space otaku, you know that there is an inherent issue with aliens wanting to do that. In order to get to us, their technology has to be so advanced that they could, if they wanted to, conquer us and our planet in a heartbeat. And while aliens can easily beat us in technology, in DanDaDan what they don't possess is the means to fight the yokai, which is the same reason our group is being targeted by the aliens, to figure that out, and because some of them need those sexual organs to reproduce. And speaking of, while I talked previously about dirty humor being a light-hearted icebreaker that the author uses to give us a breathing break, sex is also a private thing, and while I know this is a sensitive topic, I personally think when the author knows how to break that barrier in the right way, it helps make things get creepy, like really creepy. Now, I know some people on Twitter won't be able to handle the level of nudity no matter how it's expressed, not to mention the fan service this show have to offer, but honestly, it's not a huge part of the story, but it certainly is there in the beginning, and it actually helps set the tone quite well, which, speaking of, I am honestly quite amazed by how well Yuki Nobutatsu manages to mix different tones and settings. It really is peak, and if you want an idea of just how peak DanDaDan gets, well, as I mentioned, I only got back into DanDaDan by chance. In fact, to be more specific, I got into it when I was on a cruise ship. Yeah, you know, one of those fun boats filled with parties, shopping and activities? Now, I had half an hour to spare, no Wi-Fi, and still had it downloaded on my phone, so I thought, why not? Well, that half hour turned into the vast majority of my cruise spent in our small cabin, reading DanDaDan. So I guess my one and only warning is be careful when you pick this up. Speaking of, something else we should be careful of is AI, which you can find out more about by clicking here. With that said, take care, bye!